Two twin brothers. One of them falls into a coma, but what the other sees in the mirror makes him tremble, and what happens next makes their mother break down in tears. The sun was still rising, casting a warm light over the narrow streets of San Miguel de Allende. The sound of bicycles cutting through the wind was the only noise on that quiet morning. Samuel and Michael were coming down the dirt road, kicking up dust as if they were the only ones in the world. They looked the same on the outside, but if you looked closely, you could tell that Samuel was more impulsive, always with messy hair and an easy laugh, the kind that sticks with you. Michael was calmer, always watching over his brother as if taking care of him, even if he didn't say anything. "Come on, slow down," Samuel shouted, turning the handlebars to the left and pedaling harder. Michael snorted and laughed at the same time. "You always cheat on the curve, Samuel, and you always complain when you lose, Michael," Samuel replied. They both laughed loudly as only brothers know how to do when they don't yet know what the world can do to them. They passed by the field of sunflowers swaying in the wind, and by the old house of Doña Lucha, who always shouted from her balcony, "Kids, be careful with that speed," but they just waved and disappeared around the next curve. It was Saturday, and Saturday was a day of freedom, a day to forget about school, their parents' problems, the noise of the city. Only the two of them existed, the road, the smell of dry earth, and the clear sky, as if it had been washed during the night. "You know what I wish for?" said Samuel, suddenly pedaling more slowly. "I wish we never grew up." Michael turned his face, half laughing, half thoughtful. Silly. Why didn't Samuel answer right away? He just looked at his brother with an expression that Michael didn't understand at the time. It was like affection mixed with fear. Because growing up seems to change everything, and I don't want anything to change. Michael shook his head, but with a smile on the corner of his mouth, he sped up again and shouted, "Then let's ride faster than time." Samuel laughed loudly and followed him. The wind hit their faces, bringing the smell of eucalyptus and wet earth, even though it hadn't rained. They rode through a shallow puddle and got wet without meaning to. They shouted "yuck" together, laughing at their own silliness. On the last descent before the main road, Michael let go of the handlebars and shouted like a superhero. Samuel did the same. For a few seconds, they weren't just two teenagers. They were eternal, untouchable, indestructible. The sound of laughter could still be heard on the road when it was all over. Michael was a few meters behind, pedaling calmly, his heart still beating fast from the race, the wind hitting his face, bringing that rich smell of dry grass. Further ahead, Samuel was zigzagging with his bike, playing as usual on the curves. He let go of one hand, turned in the air, and laughed to himself. It was only a second on that curve where the road narrowed between two old wooden fences that a truck appeared, very fast, very big, noisy, as if it had come out of nowhere. Michael only managed to see the gray blur, the dust rising, the sound of brakes, that horrible sound of metal cutting through the air. Samuel screamed, but it was too late. The impact was sharp, a dull thud, as if something had broken inside. Samuel's bike flew through the air, and his body fell to the ground near the ravine. A strange silence filled the air. Even the birds fell silent. Michael threw his bike in the middle of the road and ran. His heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of his chest. His feet slipped on the loose dirt. The dust still hadn't settled. He tripped, fell, got up, and ran again. Ikil, his voice trembling, saw his brother lying there on his side, his leg bent in a strange way, his face covered in dirt, his eyes closed, very still, too still. Samuel screamed again, now kneeling beside him. "Talk to me. Come on, say something, please." Michael touched his cold arm. His hand was shaking so much he could barely hold it. His eyes filled with tears. 1, 2, then so many he couldn't see properly. "No, no, no," he repeated like a desperate prayer. The truck driver ran out of the vehicle shouting for help, but for Michael, the world had fallen silent. All that existed was that body on the ground, the blood mixed with the dust, the bike all bent over a few meters away. Michael didn't know what to do. He only knew that he needed his brother to open his eyes, even if just a little, just a sign, a word, a movement, anything. "You're going to be okay," he said, crying. "I'm here, brother. I'm here." But Samuel didn't respond, and in that moment, on that dusty road that had once been full of laughter, something broke inside Michael, as if the world had changed, as if it had become colder, dark. He squeezed his brother's hand tightly, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Please don't leave me alone." The lights in the hospital were too bright, too harsh. Everything smelled of alcohol, fear, urgency. Michael ran in, still wearing his dirt-stained clothes, his face streaked with dried tears. He couldn't feel his legs. He didn't know where he was. He could only hear the nurse's quick footsteps, the sound of the IV dripping, the beeping of the monitors. Everything seemed distant, as if he were there, but outside his body. Samuel had been taken straight to a room with doors that closed too quickly. Michael stood there, not knowing where to look. When his mother arrived, her face white with fear, hugging her purse to her chest, she saw her son and asked, almost without a voice, "Where is he?" Michael couldn't answer. He just pointed, and the tears came back like a storm. Doña Rosa ran to the reception desk, but no one explained anything. Minutes later, or perhaps hours, because time no longer made sense, his father Ernesto arrived with a serious face and red eyes, but without crying. He didn't hug anyone. He just sat down on a bench in the hallway, lowered his head, and stayed there with his hands clasped together, as if trying to stop something from escaping inside him. The emergency room door opened, and the doctor came out. He was a simple man, with a tired face. His clothes were stained with blood. He slowly took off his cap and walked toward them with a look that said more than any words could. "He's in a coma," he said quietly, looking first at Rosa and then at Ernesto. "We don't know if he'll wake up." Doña Rosa shook her head, as if she didn't understand, as if it were another language. "Coma? But this morning he was laughing. His voice trailed off. Michael felt such a sharp pain in his chest that he had to sit down. His head was spinning. His hands were shaking. Rosa brought both hands to her face and began to rock back and forth, making no sound at first. Then came the crying, a cry that cut through the air, a cry without screams, without force, just despair. The father stood still, not moving, just staring at the floor. His breathing was heavy, and suddenly he looked older, as if 10 years had passed in 5 minutes. Michael stood there silently in a corner, his eyes fixed on a dark spot on the floor near the door. He heard everything echoing, his mother crying, his father breathing deeply, the doctor saying they would do everything possible, but that everything possible was not enough. Inside his head, one phrase repeated itself over and over. "He's in a coma. We don't know if he'll wake up." It was like a sentence, like a wall, like an end that came without warning. Michael closed his eyes, and there in that cold hallway, time stood still. The room was small and cold, with white tile walls and the strong smell of medicine. The window looked out onto a dull hallway where there was a constant noise of quick footsteps, creaking stretchers, and nurses murmuring orders. But inside, where Samuel was lying, everything was silent, a thick silence that hurt the ears. Michael came every day, sitting in the same chair next to the bed. He didn't use his cell phone or read anything. He just stayed there with his brother. At first, he talked a lot, recounting every detail of the day, every silly childhood memory, imitating voices and telling jokes as if trying to wake his brother with the force of his voice. "Do you remember when we caught the neighbor's dog and threw it in the pool?" he said, smiling with teary eyes. "Doña Lucha almost called the police, brother, but Samuel didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't move." Michael also sang softly some songs that they both liked as children, others that their mother listened to on the radio in the kitchen. He sang out of tune with a trembling voice, and sometimes, when the sadness was too great, he just cried silently. One night, the hospital was especially quiet. The lights in the hallway had been turned off earlier, and only the dim light from the nightstand illuminated Samuel's pale face. Michael was leaning on the edge of the bed with his head resting on the mattress, staring at the ceiling without thinking about anything. That's when he saw it. The mirror on the wall next to the sink began to fog up slowly, as if someone had breathed very close to it. But there was no steam. It wasn't cold. Nothing to explain it. Michael slowly raised his head and frowned, and looked around. Everything was quiet. Samuel was still lying down, the machines making their regular sounds. He looked at the mirror again. His reflection was there, but something was wrong. It was smiling, but Michael wasn't smiling. He got up slowly, took 2 steps, and approached the mirror. The reflection was still smiling, but what gave Michael the most chills were the eyes. They weren't his eyes. They were Samuel's eyes. The same lively eyes full of mischief that he had known since the cradle. Those eyes that sparkled when they did something naughty, that filled with hidden tears when they saw their mother sad, that looked at him sometimes without saying anything, but saying everything. Michael put his hand on the mirror. The glass was warm, hot. Michael whispered, "Samuel," without knowing why. The reflection continued to smile, but did not respond. Little by little, the fog disappeared, and the reflection returned to normal, without a smile, without a sparkle, just a boy, with tired eyes and a face marked by sleepless nights. Michael stood there, looking at himself, trying to understand his shortness of breath and cold hands, but deep down, he felt that it wasn't his imagination, that somehow his brother had tried to talk to him, even if it was only with his eyes, even if it was from the other side of the mirror. Michael became strange after that night. He spoke less and hardly ate. His eyes were sunken with dark circles. He spent hours sitting still, staring at the mirror in the hospital room as if waiting for something to happen again. And when his mother asked him about it, he just shrugged or pretended not to hear. But one morning while they were having breakfast in the small, hot hospital dining room, he lowered his head, pushed the bread on his plate, and whispered very quietly, "He's calling me, in the mirror." Doña Rosa stopped stirring the sugar in her coffee and looked slowly at her son. "What do you mean, he's calling you, son?" Michael looked at his own fingers squeezing the plastic cup. "I see him every night in the mirror. He's on the other side, calling me with his hand." She tried to hide her fear with a slight smile, but her voice came out trembling. "It must be fatigue, my love. It was a big scare, wasn't it?" "It's not a dream," said Michael, his eyes filled with tears. "And when I sleep, I dream about him, always the same, him there on the other side, with his hand outstretched as if waiting for me to take it." Rosa took her son's hand on the table. It was ice cold. She didn't know what to do. It was as if she had 2 children suffering at the same time, one in bed and the other there in front of her, disappearing little by little. That afternoon, she took Michael to the little chapel in the village, which was high up on the hill. Father Tomas lived there, a simple, elderly man with a steady gaze and rough hands. He welcomed them silently with a cup of hot tea. Michael didn't want to talk at first. He just stared at the floor. But after a while, when Rosa went out to pray alone, he opened up and told him everything about the mirror. Samuel's smile, his eyes, his nightmares, the feeling that he was being pulled away. Father Tomas didn't interrupt him even once, just listened like someone who had heard stories like this before. When Michael finished, the priest stayed for a while, staring at the steam rising from the tea, as if thinking about how to say what he wanted to say. "The love between twins," he said softly, "sometimes goes beyond the body." Michael looked up, expecting more of an explanation, some guidance, but the priest said nothing more. He just put his hand on his head and made the sign of the cross. Back home, Rosa asked, "What did he say to you?" Michael replied, looking out the car window, "That love between twins sometimes goes beyond the body, and nothing else," as if that already said it all, as if deep down he knew that what he was feeling wasn't just in his head. The days passed, one after another, all seeming the same. The hospital, the room, the chair next to Samuel's bed. Little by little, Michael began to disappear, not on the outside, but on the inside. He stopped going to school, stopped answering his friends' messages. He no longer picked up his cell phone. He didn't want to know about anyone. He just wanted to be there, close to his brother. When his parents insisted that he go out for a bit, get some fresh air, see the light of day, he would smile a little and say, "What for?" and sit back down in the same corner, in the same way, every day. But soon even that was not the same. Michael began to talk to himself, first in whispers, then in entire conversations, as if he were talking to someone next to him. "Did you see that?" he would say, looking at the mirror or the ceiling. Or he would suddenly laugh with that slight, mocking laugh. But it wasn't his laugh, it was Samuel's. Exactly the same. One afternoon, while Rosa was changing the water in the flowers in the room, she heard, "Don't be silly, Santi. I know you were scared to death by horror movies. Don't lie." She turned slowly, thinking someone had come in, but it was just Michael sitting with a smile, staring at the wall. She didn't say anything. She just kept changing the water, but inside her heart tightened as the days went by. He started talking with an accent, a way of speaking that wasn't his own, faster, looser, as if he were imitating someone, but no one laughed. No one found it funny. Dad Ernesto held out as long as he could, but one night he found Michael in the yard looking at the bathroom mirror that they had brought home. He was barefoot, his shirt crooked, his eyes half lost. "What are you doing there, son?" Michael turned with a strange smile but didn't answer. Ernesto approached him and grabbed him firmly by the shoulders, not with anger, but with fear. "Michael, look at me. You're scaring me, son." Michael blinked slowly, as if returning from somewhere far away. His voice came out softly. "I just want to talk, Dad." Ernesto took a deep breath and closed his eyes. His hand trembled on his son's back. "Samuel is alive. We've already lost almost everything. We're not going to lose you, too." Michael didn't answer. He just rested his head on his dad's chest slowly, and for the first time in days, cried silently, almost without air. And there, in the darkness of the yard, with a dirty mirror nearby and the smell of night in the air, father and son remained embraced. Two broken men, one trying to hold the other, both afraid of not being able to. The night was colder than usual. The wind made a strange noise as it passed through the cracks in the bathroom window. Inside, the dim light flickered, and the mirror was fogged up. Even though no one had bathed, even though there was no steam, it seemed to breathe on its own. Michael stood there quietly, looking at his reflection. He had deep circles under his eyes, his hair all messy, his lips chapped, but that wasn't why he was there. He was silent, motionless, his eyes fixed on the mirror as if waiting for an answer, as if listening to a whisper from far away. Suddenly, he saw Samuel. It wasn't his reflection. It wasn't him. It was Samuel on the other side of the mirror, the same eyes as always. But this time, they were crying, really crying, as if asking for help, as if saying, "Get me out of here." Michael took a step back. He had trouble breathing. He shook his head, squeezed his eyes shut, opened them again, and it was still there. "Why?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Why are you like this?" The reflection didn't answer. It just cried. Michael felt something break inside him, a silent despair that came from the depths of his soul, like a lost child calling for his mother. He shouted, "Enough!" And suddenly, without thinking, without measuring, he grabbed the plastic cup from the sink and threw it at the mirror. The glass shattered with a sharp sound. One piece flew far away, another fell straight into the sink, and a larger piece fell to the floor. Michael backed away, breathing heavily, his heart beating very fast. The noise had been loud. Rosa came running from the bedroom, barefoot, her robe still untidy. She stood in the doorway. "What happened, Michael? Are you okay?" But when she looked at the bathroom, there was no scream, no answer, just Michael standing in the middle of the bathroom, with his eyes full of tears, his hands shaking. The mirror now had a long crack in the middle, as if it had been cut with a razor. On the floor, among the pieces, one in the shape of a triangle sparkled, and right in the center, a real tear, wet as if someone had left it there. Rosa bent down slowly, looked at the piece, looked at her son. "Did you cut yourself?" Michael shook his head, almost moving his lips. "It wasn't mine." She didn't understand, but the way he spoke, the way he looked at the glass, made her stay quiet. She picked up the piece, carefully, wrapped it in a cloth, and then took Michael to his room. She sat with him on the bed and stroked his hair like she used to when they were little. Neither of them slept that night, and the mirror stayed there, cracked like a crack in the wall. That night was different. Michael was exhausted, his body aching, his head heavy. He fell asleep unintentionally, leaning against the edge of Samuel's bed, his fingers still clutching his brother's. And that's when he dreamed about him. In the dream, they were together, but it wasn't the hospital. It wasn't the room with cold walls. It was a huge field full of yellow, orange, and red flowers. Flowers Michael had never seen before, and the sky was a blue that didn't seem of this world. Samuel was standing next to him in Bermuda shorts, an old t-shirt, barefoot, with that same smile he always had when they stole mangoes from the neighbor's yard. "Is this real?" Michael asked, turning in circles, smelling the sweet perfume of the flowers. Samuel replied in a calm voice, "It's peaceful here, but it's not forever." Michael looked at him confused, took a step, wanted to ask more, but Samuel was already walking away among the flowers. "Wait!" Samuel shouted. He turned his face, smiled again, and said, "Wake up, you idiot." At that moment, Michael opened his eyes. He was back in the hospital, the room dimly lit, the sound of the monitors filling the silence. But something was different. Samuel's heart, which until then had been stable and monotonous, began to beat faster. The beeping sound was now whisperer. Not much, but it was noticeable. He was alive. Michael jumped up, looked at the monitor, and he squeezed his brother's hand. His heart was beating fast. "You heard me, right?" he whispered, his voice breaking. It was you." He didn't tell anyone, not that day, but something inside him changed. The next morning, he took some notebooks and pens and began to write letters to Samuel. Simple things. The sky was beautiful today. Mom cried at breakfast, but then she smiled. Dad fixed the water tap. "I miss how you used to knock on the bathroom door when I was late." He wrote and folded the paper carefully. Sometimes he put it under his brother's pillow. Other times he went to the hospital courtyard where there was an old metal drum. He lit a match and burned the letter right there in silence. The paper turned to ash and blew away with the wind. "Take it to him," he said, looking up at the sky. It was his way of not going crazy, of staying close, of believing that somewhere Samuel was still reading. And every night, without failing to sleep next to his brother, sometimes holding hands, other times just with his shoulder touching the bed, waiting for a new dream, a new sign, because now he was sure Samuel was still there, and the road was perhaps not as far away as it seemed. The early morning was quiet, one of those that seemed to weigh on the air. The hospital slept with its empty corridors and cold lights. Outside, the night was thick, windless, soundless, but inside that room, something was not at peace. Rosa woke up with a feeling. It wasn't a noise. It wasn't a dream. It was a restlessness that tightened her chest. Suddenly, she got up slowly, put on her sandals, and left the little room where her parents were resting. The hallway was empty. She walked with short steps to the room where her children were. The door was ajar, everything dark except for the blue light of the monitor flashing in the corner. She entered. Her heart sank into her chest. Michael's bed was empty. She looked around. Nothing. The bathroom light was on. She went there, and when she opened the door, what she saw froze her soul. Michael was standing right in front of the broken mirror with his eyes closed, his hands hanging at his sides, murmuring something softly, almost like a prayer. "I'm going with him, just for a little while, just a little while." Rosa felt her legs buckle. She took 2 quick steps and grabbed him by the shoulders. "Michael, son, wake up!" He didn't react. He kept murmuring as if he were somewhere else, as if his body were there, but his soul had already left. "Don't do this to me," she begged, shaking him hard. "Wake up, please." Then Michael opened his eyes. For a moment she thought he had come back, but he couldn't see her. His eyes were lost, empty, very deep, and in a second, he passed out. His body fell forward, and Rosa held him as best she could, crying and screaming down the hallway. "Help! Help my son!" Nurses came running, lifted Michael carefully, laid him on the stretcher, put oxygen on him, shone a light in his eyes, checked his pulse. But Rosa could only stare at the mirror. The crack was still there, like a living scar, and her face was reflected, pale and frightened, her eyes full of tears. She placed her hand on the cold surface of the glass, and, in a voice quieter than a sigh, said, "Give me back my son." "Give me back both of them." And she stayed there, in silence, holding the hand of her unconscious son, no longer understanding what was dream, what was reality, what was loss. She only knew that something was slipping away, and she no longer knew how to stop it. Michael's fainting spell was the final straw that no one wanted to reach. The next day, they called a doctor from the capital, a young, educated specialist with round glasses and difficult words. He sat with Rosa and Ernesto in a small hospital room that smelled of stale coffee and had a fan that made more noise than air. "Your son's case is serious," he said, opening a folder with papers and tests. "The clinical name is dissociative disorder, deep trauma. He has lost the sense of separation between himself and his brother. He lives in a state of emotional confusion." Rosa just listened, but understood almost nothing. She just saw her son disappear a little more each day. "He is at risk of losing himself," replied the doctor bluntly. "It's as if he's trying to live in his brother's place, out of pain, out of love." He prescribed a list of medications: antidepressants, anti-anxiety drugs, mood stabilizers. He handed everything over in an envelope and said they had to start immediately. Michael listened in silence, took the pills, and thanked him with a gesture, pretending to accept. But no one saw when he threw everything in the bathroom trash can. That same night, with everyone asleep, Michael returned to the mirror, lit a small candle in the corner of the room, removed the cap from a blue pen, and wrote another letter. Sitting on the floor, breathing calmly, his eyes fixed on the page, he wrote carefully in firm but sad handwriting, "If I don't come back, take care of him. I have to go for him." He signed with both their names, Michael and Samuel, folded the paper carefully and was going to burn it. But this time, he didn't. He left it on the bed like someone leaving a note, a request, a last bond. The next morning, Rosa entered the room to call her son for breakfast. The sun was shining through the window, gently touching the sheets. She saw the paper before she saw Michael. She read it slowly. Her hand and heart trembled. It almost stopped. She sat on the floor. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stayed there with her head down, her fingers clutching the letter to her chest, crying softly, like someone praying without words, like someone who understands deep in their soul that love can be stronger than anything, but it can also hurt to the bone. Michael began to change again, but not in the way that used to scare his parents. Now it was something more subtle and deeper. It was as if the silence between him and his brother had been filled with memories, but not his own. Michael was sitting on the bench in the hospital garden when he called Nurse Clara, a young woman who had cared for the children with affection from the first day. She thought it was just another request for water or to know the time, but Michael looked at her intently, as if carrying a secret on his back. "I remember something that isn't mine," he said in a low voice. She sat down next to him, tucking her name tag into her pocket. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Michael hesitated, scratched the back of his neck, and looked at the floor. "A kiss with Louisa behind the music room. It was the day it rained hard and the power went out at school." Clara frowned. "Louisa, the one who studied with you guys?" He nodded. "He never told me about it, but I saw it. I remember the smell of her perfume, the butterflies in my stomach, the way she rested her forehead on his and said, 'Only if it's our secret.'" Clara swallowed and remained silent for a few seconds. "Michael, how do you know that?" He looked ahead, his eyes somewhat lost. "I don't know. I just know." She got up, trying to hide her surprise, but the fear was evident on her face. She left quickly, saying she had something to do, and Michael remained there with his hands on his lap, feeling the gentle breeze as if someone had just passed by that early morning. Something happened. The hospital clock read 3 in the morning when the monitor in Samuel's room sounded different. A high-pitched sound, followed by a rapid rhythm. The doctors rushed in, the lights came on, and there were quick footsteps inside the room. Samuel smiled a little, almost imperceptibly, but he smiled. "It's a reflex," said a doctor, writing down the data on the sheet. "There may be involuntary activity, but on the other side of the glass in the hallway, Michael saw everything, standing hand in hand with Rosa. And at that very moment, he also smiled. The same smile, in the same way, as if their hearts had beaten at the same time, as if something inside the coma had responded. as if for a moment the mirror between the two had broken again, but this time to let a piece of life through. The day dawned cloudy, with that low sky that seemed to weigh heavily on the city. The hospital was quieter than usual. Not even the nurses spoke loudly. It seemed that everyone felt that something was different. At lunchtime, when Rosa was serving watery soup in a small styrofoam cup, someone knocked softly on the door. 3 quick taps. Michael looked up first, and there at the entrance to the room, with his beret in his hands and a tired look on his face, was his grandfather, Don Hector, Ernesto's father. He hadn't been seen for years. He lived far away in an isolated village that could only be reached by a dirt road and a wooden bridge. But now he was there. Rosa was speechless. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. "Dad." The old man nodded with a shy smile and hugged his daughter-in-law tightly. Then he went to the bed where Samuel was sleeping, or struggling. No one knew anymore, and stroked his hair gently and silently. Michael watched everything without saying a word, feeling a mixture of nostalgia and respect. Grandfather had always been a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was as if time stood still. After a few minutes, Don Hector approached Michael, crouched down in front of him until they were face to face, eye to eye, and took his hands firmly in his own thick, hard, firm hands. "Michael." "Hello, Grandpa. I saw you both being born. The doctors didn't even know who it was. You were clinging to each other like 2 little fish in a bucket. You cried together. You slept together." Michael smiled slightly. "Moved. You were born together," he continued, his voice trembling. "Maybe you'll have to be separated like that, too." Michael swallowed hard. The world stopped for a moment. "What do you mean by that?" Grandpa didn't answer right away. He just looked at his grandson as if he saw something no one else could see. "There are bonds that are so strong that they can only be broken when one pulls the other to the right place." Michael tried to speak, but no words came out, only a stuck sigh. Don Hector held his face with both hands affectionately. "If it's love, grandson, it will hurt, but it will guide you. Trust what you feel, not what they tell you you should feel." After that, he kissed Michael on the forehead, got up slowly, and left without further explanation, without further words. What remained was silence, a silence filled with love, filled with pain, filled with everything that cannot be expressed in words. Michael looked at his brother, and deep down felt that something was approaching, something he could no longer avoid. Night fell slowly, bringing with it that heavy silence that only hospital corridors have. Outside, the city slept. Inside, the clocks seemed to have stopped. The sound of Samuel's heart monitor was the only sign of time passing. Beep, beep, beep. Michael spent the whole day silent. He didn't cry, he didn't talk much. He just looked at his brother with the look of someone who had already made up his mind. From time to time, he went out to get some air, came back, and sat there next to the bed, holding his brother's hand as he always did. But there was something different, a calmer, firmer way, as if the pain had become a certainty. When his parents went to bed, tired from a routine that no longer had beginning or end, Michael was left alone in the room. He got up slowly, opened the backpack that was always at the foot of the bed, and took out a piece of clothing. It was Samuel's favorite gray t-shirt, the one with the picture of an old band that he wore almost every weekend. The t-shirt still had his smell mixed with laundry detergent and adolescence. Michael put it on slowly and carefully, as if it were armor. He went to the bathroom, washed his face, and looked in the mirror, the same one that had been broken one day. Now it was taped back together, but it still let him see what he needed to see, his own face, and his brother's eyes hidden there in the background. He returned to the room, turned off the light, leaving only the lamp on, looked at the bed, took a deep breath, and whispered, "If you're listening, Santi, wait for me. Just wait for me." He lay down next to his brother carefully on his side, very close. He pulled the sheet up to his chest and pressed his forehead against his brother's. "I'm only going for a little while," he whispered. He closed his eyes slowly and remained silent. His breathing slowed, his body relaxed. His chest rose and fell gently, like someone who is ready to cross over, not to flee, but to search. At that moment, nothing else existed. Only 2 brothers, one in a coma, the other in silence, and a love so deep that even the body could not bear. In the dream, everything was strange but familiar, a gray sky without sun or moon, and a silence that was not frightening, but only made the heart beat more slowly. Michael stood there barefoot, feeling the wet grass under his feet. In front of him was a wide river with calm but dark water, one of those rivers that seem to hold secrets at the bottom. On the other side, he saw Samuel standing with his arms crossed, wearing the same t-shirt he always liked, his hair messy, his face serious, but with that half-smile that only he knew how to do. Michael felt his chest ache with so much sadness, relief, everything all at once. Michael shouted loudly, "Come back, you idiot!" Samuel didn't answer. He just looked as if he were listening from far away. Michael took a step forward. The water froze his toes. The river looked deep, infinite, but he didn't think twice. He took a deep breath and jumped in. The impact was like a blow to the body. The water surrounded him. It wasn't just cold, it was heavy, dense as if it carried memories, fears, everything that hurt. But Michael swam hard, with determination, as if it were his only chance, because it was. With each stroke, he felt his body getting lighter, as if he were leaving the weight of the world behind. When he reached the other side, panting and soaked, he fell to his knees on the soft earth. Samuel ran towards him. He said nothing, just knelt down too, and the two looked at each other closely, very closely. "I was afraid," Samuel said, his voice breaking. "But you came," Michael swallowed, breathing heavily. "I don't know how to go back without you." Samuel smiled, his eyes filled with tears. "Then stay a little while." They hugged there in that world that seemed to exist only for the two of them, a long, tight hug, as if time had stopped just to let that moment pass. Neither of them cried, but the silence between them said it all. It was as if the pain, the sadness, the absence, everything had taken shape and healed there in that embrace on the other side of the river. The real world waited, but in that moment, neither of them wanted to return because, for the first time in a long time, they were complete together, and complete. The embrace was still going on when the light appeared. It did not come from the sky or the ground. It was as if it were born inside them, little by little, growing until it filled everything, a calm white light that did not hurt the eyes. It was warm, but did not burn. It touched the skin like a caress, like relief. Samuel looked at the light, and then at his brother. "It's time to go back," he said, almost in a whisper. Michael squeezed his arm tightly. He did not want to let go, not yet. "What if I don't remember anything?" he asked, his voice trembling almost like a child's. Samuel smiled that smile he always gave when he said, "Trust me, I'll remember for both of us." Michael closed his eyes. He felt the light grow brighter. He felt his skin tingle. He felt his heart beat differently, as if something were pulling him back slowly. And then, in a second, everything disappeared. In the hospital, it was 3:05 in the morning when Michael screamed. He woke up with his body sweaty, his breathing agitated, his eyes wide open, as if he had come out of the water. The scream was heard throughout the hallway. The nurses ran. The doctors rushed into the room. "It's okay," Rosa shouted, scared but relieved. "He's back! He's back!" Meanwhile, in the bed next to him, Samuel's monitor sounded different. Beep, beep, beep. And then, suddenly, silence. The sound broke. The line remained flat. "Code Blue!" shouted one of the doctors. The room became a whirlwind of hands, voices and machines trying to revive Samuel. His body was still, his eyes still closed. And then, when no one was expecting anything, the sound returned, faint at first, then louder. Beep beep, a living heartbeat. Rosa cried with her hands over her face. Ernesto leaned against the wall, trembling, and there, without a sound, the miracle began. Samuel's fingers moved a little, a slight tremor in his right index finger, but it was enough. It was life. It was a response. Michael, still lying down, felt it even though his eyes were closed, even though he was weak. "I told you," he whispered, almost without a voice. "I went for you." And then he burst into tears in that little room, between the light of the machines and the smell of alcohol. Something impossible had happened, and everyone felt it. It wasn't even dawn when Samuel opened his eyes. It was slow, his heavy eyelids. The world around him was blurry. The light from the nightstand softly hit the ceiling, and the sound of the heart monitor filled the silence with that beep that now seemed like a song. He blinked and tried to focus. His body felt light and weak, as if he had returned from a faraway place. He turned his head with effort, and there he was, Michael, sitting next to the bed, slumped over from exhaustion, his face swollen from crying so much. He slept with his mouth slightly open, one hand clutching the corner of his brother's sheet, like someone who didn't want to let go for even a second. Samuel stared at him for a while without saying anything, just feeling that he was back, feeling that someone had waited for him. In a voice as soft as a breath of air, he whispered, "Thank you for staying with me." And a tear rolled down his slowly, warmly, silently, down the edge of his eye, and was lost in the white pillow. Minutes later, Michael woke up first. He just moved his head, half asleep, then opened his eyes and saw Samuel awake, watching him. For a second, Michael didn't breathe. His heart stopped. His throat closed up. Then everything exploded in his chest. Michael shouted, jumping up, "Is it really you?" Samuel said nothing, just opened his arms, and then came the hug. Michael threw himself into it carefully, but with the strength of someone who had been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders for months. He hugged him tightly and cried with all his might. Samuel also cried, a quiet, tired cry, but one full of relief. The nurses who had just come in with the test results stopped and covered their mouths with their hands. One of them started to cry too, and the other ran to tell the doctors. Rosa came running in seconds later. She saw the two of them hugging and knelt down, her hands covering her face, her mouth trembling, but she said nothing. She just cried, giving thanks in silence, like someone who sees a miracle, like someone who feels that at that moment, life returned to its place despite everything, despite the pain. There, in that hug, there was more than two brothers. There was the impossible happening in front of everyone, and no one could hold back their tears. The following days were slow and careful, as if every minute were too sacred to rush. Samuel, although he was awake, still didn't talk much. The words came out slowly, tangled, and sometimes they didn't come out at all. But his eyes said it all. When he looked at his brother, it was as if he were saying, "I'm here," without having to open his mouth. Michael understood. They sat together side by side on the bed, sometimes in silence, sometimes just listening to the TV on low, sometimes just feeling the wind blow through the open window. But the most beautiful detail was Samuel's hand. He didn't let go of his brother's hand. He held it tight, as if he were afraid of letting go once and didn't want to risk it again. Even when he was asleep, he kept squeezing, and that was enough. That warm, living hand between his fingers. Michael, for his part, also changed. He spoke less, walked slowly, and every night before going to bed, he performed a little ritual. He grabbed an old blue rag, the kind used to clean the floor, and covered the mirror in the room carefully, respectfully, like someone closing a door, because he knew that on the other side there was still something that remained, that perhaps waited. But now was not the time, just for a while, he murmured, stretching out his arm to tape the rag in place. "First we have to live here." Rosa saw him do this a few times. She didn't say anything. She just watched him from the doorway with eyes full of tears. She knew that her son wasn't doing this out of fear. He was doing it out of love, out of protection, out of exhaustion perhaps, but more than anything, out of gratitude. On the last night of that week, before turning off the light, Michael looked at his brother, already asleep, and said very quietly, "We're back, Santi, and now I'm not going to let you go again." He turned off the light, and the rag was still there, firmly covering the mirror, because there are doors that one learns not to open twice, even if the heart still hears on the other side. Time passed slowly, as it should be. Samuel gradually returned, like someone rediscovering his own body, step by step. He spoke better. The smiles returned, but he still remained silent when the subject was that time, the time of the coma. No one pressured him. Everyone was just grateful that he was there, whole, until one gray afternoon with drizzle and the window fogged up. The two were sitting on the couch in the living room, the sound of the TV on, and a random song playing softly in the background. Michael was distracted, eating pieces of bread with butter. Samuel looked at the floor thoughtfully, very quiet. Suddenly, without warning, he blurted out, "I saw you." Michael turned slowly. "Where?" Samuel looked ahead without looking directly at him. "Every night. I saw you on the other side." Michael stopped chewing. Samuel nodded his head. His voice came out low and broken. "You looked like an angel, really, but all wet and tired and angry. Sometimes you smiled, but it was you." Michael didn't respond immediately. He just looked at his brother with eyes full of tears, his chest tight inside. "You called me, didn't you?" Samuel looked at him, remained silent for a moment, and then nodded again. A tear rolled down his cheek. "I was afraid," he said, almost without a voice. "But when you appeared, I knew I wasn't alone." Michael took a deep breath. He almost wanted to laugh, but the laughter didn't come out. A beautiful silence came out. A silence full of everything they hadn't said for months. Samuel rested his head on his brother's shoulder, and they stayed like that for a long time, the rain falling softly on the window, the world outside rushing by. But inside, just two brothers, one who had returned, the other who had never stopped waiting. And in that look, in that simple confession, lived the most beautiful thing about love, the power to bring back even those who seemed too lost to return. It was late afternoon, and the sky was orange in that way that makes it look like it's melting behind the trees. Samuel entered the room with his hands hidden behind his back and a strange little smile on his face. Michael was lying down, looking at his cell phone, but when he saw his brother standing there with that look that he was up to something, he raised his eyebrow. "What are you hiding there?" Samuel approached slowly and took out a simple string with a small, irregular charm hanging at the end. It was transparent, with a dull shine in the center. Michael took the object carefully and soon recognized what it was. "It's from the mirror," Samuel nodded. "Mom had kept it, and I kept that piece that fell on the floor that night." Michael looked at the necklace for a few seconds, then looked at his brother. He didn't say anything. "I made it for you," Samuel said more seriously. "To remember that we were one. We always were." Michael tried to smile, but the emotion stuck in his throat. He just nodded and put the necklace around his neck with trembling hands. "Thank you, Santi." "You don't have to thank me," replied his brother, hugging him quickly and tightly. "Just don't ever take it off." "Yes, never." That night, after Samuel fell asleep, Michael sat down at his desk with an old notebook. He opened it to a blank page, took a deep breath, and began to write. It was the last letter, the one that would not be burned or left under the pillow, the one that would be kept forever. "If one day I forget, you will remind me, and if you are the one who forgets, I will come back for you." He folded the page carefully and placed it inside a small wooden box that they used to keep pictures in when they were children. He closed it gently and put it at the bottom of the drawer. Michael turned off the light, lay down, and there in the darkness with the cold necklace against his chest and the silent certainty that everything they had experienced was real, he whispered, "If necessary, I will cross over again without fear," and he slept peacefully. Time passed, and with it many things changed. Michael was now a man, his face more serious, his body taller, his gaze deeper, but his eyes still had that sparkle, that same sparkle of someone who had experienced something that no one else would ever fully understand. Life went on, but it wasn't the same, never the same. One afternoon he returned to that old house, now remodeled. It was his mother's birthday, and everyone was there. Laughter, voices, delicious smells coming from the kitchen. But for some reason, he walked away, slowly climbed the stairs, went to his and Samuel's old room. The door still creaked the same. The mirror was still there, the same one with the scratched wooden frame, the discreet crack still crossing the corner, like a scar that time had refused to erase. Michael stood in front of it and stared for a while. He saw himself, but he looked different, bigger, stronger, more complete. He put his hand on his chest and grabbed the necklace, the same one, the piece of the mirror. He smiled slightly and then whispered, "Thank you for coming back." On the other side, there was only silence. No different images, No strange movements, just a simple, calm reflection. But inside his chest came a warm, silent heat, a kind of presence that cannot be explained in words. Michael didn't need a sign. He knew. He knew that even though he couldn't see him, Samuel was there in his heart, in his memory, in the time that would never be forgotten again. And in that silence in front of the mirror, there was no absence. There was gratitude for everything, for so much, for having returned. Samuel decided he wanted to take care of people. He said that if he was alive, it was because of the hands that didn't let go of his. He enrolled in nursing school with a desire that no one could stop. He was attentive, dedicated, and had a way of treating patients that touched the heart, especially those who seemed to be alone. Michael, on the other hand, chose another path, psychology. He wanted to understand the pains that cannot be seen. He wanted to put a name to what he himself had experienced. That silence, that fear, that deep love that has no logic. He studied at dawn, read in secret, wrote in old notebooks. It was as if with each new story he learned, he went back a little in time and recovered lost parts of himself. The two began working together in small hospitals in remote villages. Samuel cared for the bodies. Michael cared for the souls. And together they cared for the bonds. They went where no one else wanted to go. They sat on the floor in the hallway, waiting silently beside beds where siblings had not spoken to each other in years. They helped families understand that sometimes what seems lost is just waiting for a gesture. One afternoon in one of those hospitals, Michael was in the hallway organizing papers when he saw a skinny boy sitting on a hard plastic chair, his hand clutching tightly to another boy, his brother, who was on a stretcher, intubated, his eyes closed. Michael stopped and stared for a few seconds. Something in that gesture caught him, a kind of silence he knew very well. He approached slowly, crouched down next to the chair, and said, "Don't let go. Even though he seems far away, he can still hear you." The boy didn't answer. He just nodded with tears in his eyes and squeezed his brother's hand tighter. Michael stood up and looked down the hallway where Samuel appeared in a white coat with a calm smile. They looked at each other, and neither had to say anything. The mirror may have broken one day, but the reflection remained where it always mattered most, in the heart, in the love that knows how to wait, in the love that knows how to return. And now, I want to know from you, if you were in Michael's place, would you cross the mirror for someone you love? And if you were Samuel, would you have the courage to return? Write in the comments what you would do. We read everything with great affection, and don't forget to activate the bell that alerts you when there is a new video. Here every week, there is a new story made to touch the heart. Oh, and before you go, click on the video that is playing here on the screen. It is a story that has already made many people cry, remember those they love, and even change their lives. Trust me, you will not forget it.